atheism. You heard about the surge of Sunday assemblies, a kind of church for atheists. For some, it's a sign of how atheism is more than just the absence of belief. It's a belief in itself, searching for the identity and community of a religion. Scratch the secular surface even now, and there might be more God than you think in our national anthem. In the prayer read at the start of each sitting of Parliament, implicit, even in this Manitoba politician's unusual holiday greeting.
All you infidel atheists out there, I want to wish you the very best also.
By 2011, 1 in 4 Canadians reported having no religious affiliation, 7.8 million people. A minority compared to the country's 22 million Christians, but atheists have been asserting their identity. A few years ago, ad campaigns started in Britain.
There's probably no God. Oh.
Then those ads came here. Now it's Sunday assemblies, sing-alongs, and God-free sermons.
All the best bits of church, but with no religion and awesome pop songs.
Depending on who you ask, it's a growing church of doubt or a community based on not much. I'm joined by our panelists. John Moore is a talk radio host in Toronto. Sasha Carradine is a political commentator and writer. And Oriana Bertucci works for the Catholic Church, running outreach programs at Ryerson University. Come to you in just a second, Oriana, but I want to get a sense, maybe from you, John, first, what do you think of these godless congregations?
I think it's interesting. I also think it's instructive that it was started as somewhat of a joke by some comedians. But let's face it, what church used to give us was a sense of community, maybe a sense of collective celebration, hopefully seeking a certain level of awe. And as we drifted away from all of that, we wake up on a Sunday morning and perhaps going through arthritis is good enough. So we think maybe I can get together with a bunch of people and we can sing together. So I don't know where it's going, but I think it's perfectly human to want to be with other people.
Why not just join the Rotary Club?
Well, the Rotary Club makes you pay money, and the speeches can be drab, with all due respect to my Rotarians.
Sasha, what do you think?
Well, this congregation does demand something of you, John. It's not money, but it certainly is time, because one of the things they want is that people do good works. So I think it's very well-intentioned, but I think it's ultimately doomed to fail in the sense that it doesn't have any kind of moral code to it. And it specifically says we do not have any kind of strict beliefs except that people should do good things and come together in the spirit of community. So, well, I think it's a great idea for people to want to do that, to do positive things, and reinvigorate that spirit, that sense of togetherness that religion does bring you. I think that it will probably get a lot of interest, peak, and then subside.
So you're with the Catholic Church, Oriana. How do you feel about these people taking all the fun stuff, the singing and the pageantry, but not God?
I think each community reflects the people that are a part of it and the people who have the vision for it. So I think the music that they have, the fellowship, the components of community are still there, but it just looks a little bit different perhaps without God. And we see that across all different denominations, that we highlight what is important to that community.
So some people call it the fastest growing religion. I can't believe I'm doing this religion in North America. But is it really, like, to Tasha's point, can you really have a religion when there's no shared belief?
No, but it's not a religion. It's a setting. It's an indifference to religion. And I think a lot of people think that there's some form of anti-religion to it, and that stems back to the notion of the angry atheist. And that comes more of the fact that it was so out of the ordinary to be an atheist in the 1960s and 70s that you were treated in an interview as if you were sort of coming out of the closet, and there was an implicit hostility toward it. And also the early atheists were kind of, it wasn't good enough to say, I don't have faith. You had to try and tear the church down.
I think at the end of the day, we all want to belong. We all want a sense of community. And the root of the community is the values that they support. So whether for this community it's outreach to the community in a faith tradition, that might be God. Whatever it is that they value, people want to be together, people want to belong, and they want to find community to do that with.
Yeah, I think that that's really what this speaks to, is that there's a sense of loss of community. People are, while they are together in places like the online forums that they may seek, they are not physically with their neighbors. They're not physically with other people in the way the church used to bring people together in that actual sense. So on the Sunday morning, you're right. You know, brunch may not be the thing you want to do. You want to get together with people around a common cause. And I think that's really what this represents.
So I just want to get to, the numbers show that in the last 20 years, there's been a huge spike. Now almost, as we saw in the numbers, almost a quarter of Canadians, not necessarily atheists, but say that they don't ascribe to any particular religious affiliation. John, why is this happening?
Oh, I think one of the principal reasons is because you're free to do whatever you want. I mean, the community used to feel it had the right to judge you if you were a single woman with a baby, if you were gay, if you didn't go to church. That was a huge thing. They would, you know, tut, the person who didn't go to church. Now that we're all free to do as we please, I actually think it's more than 25%. I mean, when the census asks you the question, what is your religious affiliation? I mean, technically mine is Christian United Church because that's how I was raised, but I'm an atheist. But I might actually say I'm a Christian just because, you know, technically I am, and I don't want to disappoint my parents.
Where do you think it's coming from, Mary?
I think the rise of individualism. So as was mentioned, you know, we can connect online. We have those communities there. We don't necessarily need to always be together, and that's what church represented. I would argue, though, that there is a sense, you know, in our tradition, we think about holidays, an opportunity to gather with family, especially in a vast country like ours, the opportunity to get together becomes fewer and fewer. So when that is tied to a faith community, in a sense, I would argue that there's probably going to be a bit of a return to that.
Well, I think that the advent of science, I mean, since the Enlightenment, has really also eroded the church, because one of the pillars of church and religion in general was explaining the world to people who otherwise had no way of understanding natural phenomena or why things were the way they were. And the other pillar was the notion of a moral code, guiding your life, a way of basically knowing what to do next in a very uncertain world. But as we've got more knowledge, people require that less. They're more questioning. They are more individualistic.
So where is this going? You know, so God is in Canada, the Parliament does the Lord's Prayer. I mean, John, should there be change? Is there change coming as this keeps growing?
I think change may come slowly. I also suspect, I mean, we're in a bit of a sweet spot right now because as the baby boomers approach death, they may run back to the church because they need some level of purpose. But I think generally religiosity is on the decline. Spiritualism may be on the rise because a lot of people find spiritualism just walking amongst trees. But I would, for example, say that God does not belong in the anthem, nor do prayers belong in our parliament, because that's a personal choice. It's not your government's edict.
But it's also a historical component of our country, and I think that you saw that debate in Quebec around the crucifix, for example, in the National Assembly, that there is a strong argument to say that sometimes you should maintain certain things for historical reasons to represent what built community, what built institutions. And so I think that while there will always be people saying, you know, we should take God completely out, no Christmas trees in school, for example, this kind of thing, I think that there will be others who will always say, take a step back and say, no, it doesn't threaten me to have that tree. It doesn't threaten me to have the cross. It speaks to history.
Right. Canada is known for being a tolerant country. You know, we embrace people who come from different cultures, with different backgrounds, with different values. And I think when we look forward, we're not going to see a change in that. If anything, I think we're pushing forward into a greater sphere to say we need to be more tolerant, we need to be more inclusive of Christmas trees, of different religious holidays, as opposed to getting rid of them.
You were mentioning before you came out and said, okay, I'm an atheist, but not everybody does, and you probably didn't years ago. I mean, where is there more stigma? Is the stigma of being an atheist over, and is there a stigma on the other side now?
I think it's different in Canada than it is in the States. I mean, they actually did a study or survey, and they found out that the Americans would elect a homosexual before they'd elect an atheist, and they're not going to elect a homosexual. You know what, I used to say I was an agnostic, but the odd thing is I was educated by Jesuits, and so I would actually say the point of that was, how can I know there is no God? And I don't assert there's no God. I just say I have no sense of wonder, and if I die tomorrow, you know, you don't need to cry for me for having not died in the embrace of Jesus.
Is there stigma in being religious or in being an atheist?
I think sometimes there's more stigma in being a minority, being religious, which is and sometimes a minority. I think sometimes when we talk about the role of religion in politics, I know often I feel like saying I'm politically homeless, because when we look at our values, there is no one party that can define, that can support each of the values, and so I need to prioritize. As a tolerant country, how do we put ourselves out there and speak of who we are and do that openly when that might not be welcome?
You know, I think, though, that it really depends what group you're with, whether there's a stigma, because I would take issue with that. I think that the current government, for example, has been very welcoming of faith communities, has extended an outreach to the rest of the world to defend faiths in other places, something no government's done. But at the same time, I think if you were an overly religious politician, the general population of Canada would look askance at that. So it really depends, I think, what situation you would be in.
But I think they should look askance on it if you say there's nothing wrong with being a person of faith, but if you are one who gets into government, who wants to use the instrument of government to impose faith on others, then that is completely objectionable.
Yeah, faith is okay in the private sphere. I can share my faith with you, but just not publicly.
Yeah, but if you were my boss and you said, let's pray before we had a meeting in the morning, I'd be uncomfortable with that, and I think it's unfair. And
Do you think that's coming?
No, it's not. But I mean, in some workplaces, for example, there will be groups of workers who come together and pray in the morning, and other workers feel that they've been, shut out of the process. So that's not you being oppressed. That's me saying, let's all be secular, and you can be religious in your own place.
Well, I think the
Last point, Tessa.
the general separation of church and state is something that Canadians subscribe to. But at the same time, I think that they recognize, and will always recognize, religion has a role to play in determining the public discourse and the public sphere, because it is very important still, despite the growth of atheism, to a large number of people.
So two tricky topics here, politics and religion, and I hope we didn't offend anybody, but it was quite interesting. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
We will be right back with this.